Hello everyone, my name is KingStix, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to play Zac Jungle like a pro. The main thing to understand about Zac is he is a late game champion. If you're looking for the early game, he's not your guy. He's not great at 1v1s and he takes a bit to get going. Where he really shines is once he hits level 6, he has insane CC, damage ganks, and his secondary power spike is probably his biggest, which is a 2-3 item power spike with Wormogs having 3000 plus HP. This allows you to do repeated turret dives with your teammates behind you. The enemies don't see it coming, and it leads to a whole lot of picks and a whole lot of easy wins. The consistent turret dives once you have Mogs is super effective, and it works all the way up even in Challenger. First thing you need to get right before you start having success on Zac is your runes, items, and level order. First off is your runes. Always take Aftershock, Fawn of Life, Bone Plating, and Revitalize. For your secondary tree, go for the free boots and cooldown reduction. For your 3 rune stats, take the CDR, armor, and health. If you're in a tough early game matchup against something like Lee Sin or a Graves, you can go for double armor with the cooldown reduction instead of taking the health. For your items on Zac, you're always going to be rushing for your Cinder Hulk Blue Smite first. You can go for Red Smite, but it's not quite as good. Your next item, the majority of the time, is going to be Dead Man's Plate. It'll get you around the map quickly, make you very tanky, and most importantly, it makes you super valuable in turret dive since armor makes you take less damage from turrets. If you rush for Spirit Vestige and you're taking a turret, it's not too useful, especially if you get ignited. The extra healing you're going to be getting from the Spirit Vestige is essentially negated anyways. And lastly, for your level order, always start W, Q, and then get E at level 3. You'll then be maxing your E first, W second, and Q last, and of course taking points in your ultimate whenever you can. First things first on Zac, you want to ward the opposite side of your jungle to make sure you don't get invaded. Then recall to base no later than the 55-second mark and get your Oracle Lens. This will help you out a lot, and it will be off of cooldown by the time you go in for your first gank. In this game, I was late leaving base. I was preoccupied with other things, so I didn't get a chance to lay down my ward and then recall and get my Oracle Lens. If you do get invaded, the majority of the time, you can't 1v1 any jungler in your first couple levels on Zac. You're just not very strong, so you'll invade their jungle instead. For example, if Olaf invaded my red, I would go into his raptors and take those. Preferably, always start with your bot lane on Zac Jungle for the fastest, best leash possible. Zac is a fairly slow clearer in the early game, so getting the faster leash and healthier leash is fairly important. We saw Olaf with red buff going to gank my bot lane, so I can farm my jungle comfortably knowing he's not in mine stealing it. Normally on Zac, you do want to do a full clear. His ganks aren't very good until he's level 4, and his first real power spike is at level 6. So in this case, since I started with my bot lane, I took my blue buff, Gromp, then Wolves. Now I'm going to do my Raptors using my E, W, and Q. Make sure you are slamming them together and not just hitting the same target that you hit the Q with to begin with. One of the best things about Zac Jungle compared to other tank junglers is in the early game, assuming you get a leash on your first camp, you'll be relatively high HP. Pro tip for clearing your red buff, Q over the wall to hit your golems, then slam them together. You'll be doing more damage this way, and you'll also be getting more healing from getting an extra bloblet as well. Plus, you will be getting additional healing from your Hunter's Talisman on the golem that you hit over the wall with your Q, so it's a win-win-win. After you complete a full clear, you'll be level 4, which is the most optimal time to gank on Zac. The big issue with ganking at level 3 with Zac is his E doesn't have very much range, and you can't reach very many spots from bushes that you'd want to gank from. Once you have that second point in your E at level 4 though, it gives you that extra reach that you need to pull off many more ganks. The only real downside to doing a power clear on Zac for the level 4 is by the time you get to the Scuttle Crab, it'll be around 350. So if the enemy jungler was already in the area, odds are they will have already taken the Scuttle Crab. It's not too big of a deal though, because if you did show up at the Scuttle at level 3, you would probably lose the 1v1 anyways. After taking Scuttle Crab, I'm feeling good. I still have both refillable potions and I'm level 4 with red buff, so I'm looking to maybe fight Olaf if he's low on health. I find him, he's low on health. I auto attack him with my slow and then then E him at point blank range, that way I can't miss it. I then try to stay on top of him with my Qs and W, and I try to take my time to let Annie get closer. I do kill Olaf and waste my flash a little bit. It doesn't matter too much though, because I've bought in enough time for Annie to close in, and she does pick off the Renekton. Yes, I know it was fortunate my laner came to help me, but worst case scenario, it would have been a 1-for-1, and going 1-for-1 on Zac Jungle in the early game is pretty damn good, considering he's one of the strongest scaling junglers in the game. If I was not full HP, I would not have invaded Olaf here in the early game, or if he was full HP when I saw him, I would have just E'd away and would have avoided the fight altogether. After being low on HP, I got a lot of HP back from my red buff and from killing the Raptor camp. Ryze is pushed up, I E in, he flashes out of my E as he comes out of the anti-stun. Now that his flash is down, I hit him with my Q and slap him into his own minions. It's really important that you don't use your Q on Zac unless you have them knocked up with your E, or unless the enemy is already CC'd. So in this case, I use my red buff slow to help ensure my Q land. When you're low on health on Zac and you're walking into danger, just make sure your E is up, and oftentimes you can get away. In this case, Olaf is real horny, so he's gonna use his blue smite on me flash. Thank God, once again, this Annie is a roaming god. This is one of the only situations where Zac passive isn't trash when your teammates are there to help you. The majority of the time when you go down on Zac, unless you're underneath a turret or your teammates are there, it won't do you any good and the enemy will just kill you all the same. So make sure you're either under a turret or your teammates nearby, otherwise Zac might as well not have a passive. The only exception is if the enemy is ridiculously low on health and you have your Cinder Hulk, in which case your passive Bloblets can actually burn them to death as they're trying to kill you. I've gotten a lot of health back from the wolf camp, and now I'm going to heal off of the scuttle with my smite and Bloblets. I'm nearly level 6 and I see the enemy bot lane is shoved, which is why I wanted to stay. I can pull off something really spicy. Here Ryze sees me, but I speed away with the scuttle crab and I'm trying to get to his bot lane before he can. I figured his bot lane wouldn't react in time to get away from my game. Whenever enemies push up for your turrets is a perfect time to E over a wall or bush. It sets up a really easy knock up. Now that I have MF knocked up, I immediately Q the Pyke and then auto attack her. Now that they're together, I take 2 steps backwards before I press R. The duration of your Q knockup lasts long enough for you to take a step or two. That way you can angle your ultimate's knockback to push the enemies in the direction that you want it to. In this case, Pyke got really lucky with his dash interaction with my ultimate, and he actually got to break through my ultimate CC with his dash. Kind of lucky there, but at least we still got the MF. Note, I still haven't backed here yet, guys. I'm sitting on nearly 3k gold. I do not recommend doing this. Vast majority of the time you want to back around 1500 gold, but in this case constant situations kept presenting themselves, which is why I've stayed. As you can see, you can take blue and Gromp at the same time on Zac. I wouldn't recommend doing it any earlier than level 3 at the very earliest, because you will be taking a lot more damage this way. It is quite a bit faster to take them both at once, and since I want to recall anyways, it just made sense to do it. Feel free to go back to the 1 minute 20 second mark to see the items in item order. In this game, since I had a ridiculous amount of gold, I could afford a Cinder Hulk on my very first back, and now I'm building straight into a Dead Man's Plate. The enemy team is extremely AD heavy. Their only AP champion is Ryze, but he's pretty far behind. Plus, I prefer going Dead Man's Plate. Besides the point, Dead Man's Plate is more beneficial than Spirit Visage, even against a mixed damage enemy team, because of the movement speed it provides and the armor it gives in a dive situation is super valuable. Not to mention the empowered auto attack and slow it gives makes it really easy for you to land your Q after autoing the enemy. Normally you want to wait for the enemy to start attacking your turret before you E them. In this case, since Olaf was I felt like he was gonna leave after he finished killing my minions, so I went ahead and E'd him, Q, W, ultimate to kill him. When you're using your ultimate, try to bounce around a little bit and pick up Bloblets as you go. Your ultimate will constantly splash Bloblets off, plus you can spam your W while in your ultimate, and your ultimate gives you a really big Bloblet pickup radius, so even if you bounce near a Bloblet, it'll pick it up. So try to bounce around a bit, hit the enemies, and pick up Bloblets at the same time. What I'm doing right now is invading the enemy's jungle after I killed him, that way there's no one to resist me. I'm also waiting for Ryze to get back to lane. In this case, I have the option of ganking bot or killing mid lane. If Pyke was full HP, since my ultimate is down, I wouldn't have come bot, instead I would have gone mid. I messed up and accidentally used my E instantly by pressing E and then letting go of the key. In a gank like this where you come all the way up behind the enemy, enemies, you'd actually want to hold onto your E and close the distance and use your Q after blue smiting them first. The only time you open up with an E is if the enemies can't see you or if you need to use it to close the distance because you can no longer reach them. Another great time to use your E is if an enemy is pushed up on your turret or if they're hiding underneath their turret. Here Ryze feels safe, he's near his turret. I slap him with my E, but then a minion walks in front of me as I'm using my Q on him, a minion that didn't get stunned by my E. And then I thought that I had Q'd Ryze, auto-attacked a minion after using my Q, and then we got nothing. You need to pay really close attention to what your Q actually lands on when you use it. That way you don't auto-attack the same thing that you Q'd. Once you have several points in your E, it'll be on a low cooldown to where you can repeat gank the same lane. Here, Ryze was not expecting it. After knocking him up, I Q'd him, auto him into the minion, and it set up a really easy kill. Now that Ryze is dead, I can go into the enemy's jungle and start taking stuff, particularly since I see 𝐒𝐿𝐴. Even though I am low on HP, I can just heal off one of the monster camps. I'm keeping a close eye on 𝐒𝐿𝐴 as I'm doing this to try to stay as safe as possible and make the best choice based on the information. I want to pull blue buff towards the edge of the bush so I can slam him and 𝐒𝐿𝐴 together once 𝐒𝐿𝐴 gets here. Sure enough, he shows up not suspecting anything. I slam him against the blue W and ult on top of him. Notice how I'm bouncing around on top of my bloblets to maximize my healing. This is one of those situations where rushing an early Bramble Vest can be very advantageous if you're playing against a high heal champion, particularly if they have Conqueror. If I had Bramble Vest, I easily would have won that, but 𝐒𝐿𝐴 was healing like crazy off of his W and Conqueror. That's okay, it's all a part of limit testing. 𝐒𝐿𝐴 is overchasing once again. Annie, like a god, coming in for the fat rotation. 𝐒𝐿𝐴 falling for it once again for the Zac passive. I bet you after this game, he has probably learned his lesson, but for this game, it's something he just had to work through. If you are fighting a high healing champion, you're probably not going to beat them on Zac, particularly if it is a Conqueror champion. Even if you are really far ahead of them, Zac just isn't that great at 1v1s against these kinds of champions. One final thing I want to mention is with Zac's E, if you are using it as an escape tool, it does take a little bit to charge it up. So you need to take that into account when escaping because the enemies will be able to get off some final jabs as you're trying to run away. It's usually better to get to a bush first before you use it. That way you keep them guessing whether or not you're running or starting up your E. Even though Zac can't solo Conqueror healing champions, he can easily solo champions that don't have much lifesteal or healing at all. Things like Misfortune or AD carries that don't build Bork. The only AD carries that can comfortably solo Zac most of the time are things like 𝐒𝐿𝐴 or Vayne, AD carries with max % health damage. Zac also usually destroys squishy mages and destroys squishy assassins as well. The only thing that can go toe-to-toe with them, like we discussed, is a strong healing or max % health damage champion, typically something that has a lot of healing. In general though, it is best to fight around your team on Zac since you have so much CC, all of which are knockups which cannot be cleansed or QSS'd, which makes Zac such an amazing tool for ripping apart high priority targets, assuming his team is behind him. Once you get a good understanding of how much damage Zac can do, you can go toe-to-toe with some formidable opponents, such as Ryze. Here I was already missing a big chunk of health, as was Ryze. I'm even fighting him under his turret, trying to get off as much damage as possible. I blue smite him, ultimate, and don't forget to use your E at point blank range once it comes back off of cooldown. It's super powerful, does a lot of damage, and if you already are on top of the enemies and use your E at point blank range, it's super hard to dodge since it lands so quickly. In the mid game, even before you have your Warmogs for the insane healing, you can heal back very quickly off of monster camps or minions like you see here. I'm nearly back to full health already from being nearly dead. Don't forget, the closer you are to the enemies, the easier it is to land your Q. So here I flash, then Q, knocking them together. W on top, killing MF with the Aftershock. Now I'm going to make my easy escape with my E. Don't charge up your E if the enemies still have their CC ready. For example, if Renekton held onto his stun, I wouldn't want to have used my E at that point because he could have chopped me out of my E, putting it on full cooldown. Assuming you made it to mid game without losing one or more inhibitors and you've gotten your Warmogs, the game is basically over. You're super powerful at this point, and unless Zac gets nerfed, or unless the enemy team has a 𝐒𝐿𝐴 or a Vayne, and sometimes a Yasuo, then you should be fine. There's very few champions like those, pros who can tear him up in a mid-late game situation. If you reach this point and you're ahead, it'll look like non-stop dives that the enemies just can't stop because you'll be healing so fast off of your warmogs, there's not a whole lot they can do. Now, if you are behind on Zac, you're mainly gonna be turtling, trying to farm and not lose inhibitors, because you will eventually get your 3-item power spike and be scaling super hard. When you're playing from behind, the only kind of team fights you're looking for is if the enemies are pushing up onto your turrets and your ultimate is up, in which case you engage on them, you use your E, Q, ulti, and it should be an easy fight for your teammates. And that's pretty much it, guys. Always try to do a full power clear until you're level 4 on Zac. Don't try to gank pre-4 because it's not nearly as good and it's pretty risky. Your first power spike on Zac is level 6, so that's the goal in reaching. And then the second true power spike is once you have 3 full items, your Cinder Hulk, Deadman's or Spirit Visage, and a Warmogs. At that point, the game is basically over, assuming you haven't already lost an inhibitor or all 3 inhibs. Remember, try not to use your Q until you have the enemy slowed or CC'd, and try not to use your E unless the enemies don't see you when you start it, or unless the enemies are already CC'd. If you're in a situation where you're behind the enemies and you don't want to use your Q or your E, just blue smite them first and you'll set up an easy Q combo into E or an easy E into Q combo. If you're ahead on Zac, you can look for plenty of turret dives. Remember, Aftershock OP, and Zac has 3 knockups which you cannot cleanse or QSS. If you're behind, you're just going to be trying to turtle, and if the enemies are pushing up on your turrets, if your teammates are there, you will need to engage once they start hitting your turret. It should be an easy fight, assuming your ultimate is up. You'll be able to perma-CC them, and you and your teammates should be able to pick up some much needed gold. And that is going to wrap up this Zac Jungle guide on how to play Zac Jungle like a pro here in Season 10 League of Legends. If you enjoyed this video and it helped you out, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps tremendously in the process of making content. I also do read every single comment. I just don't have the time to respond to every single one of them, but I do literally read every single one, wake up in the morning, drink some coffee, and have some good lols. That is going to wrap up this video. My name is KingStix. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.
My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush.